to What You Will Learn. My name is Adam Ashton.
And my name is Adam Jones. Today we are reviewing a book with a very loaded question. But can we avoid another financial crisis by Stephen Keen?
Mate, Steve Keen is an economist, I guess people call him. I think he hates being called an economist.
Yeah.
Because he says most economists have put their head up their arse and don't really know.
He's definitely not the mainstream type.
No.
But I guess if anyone's clicking on this episode just to find out the answer, can we avoid another financial crisis? The answer is no. So if that's all you wanted to know and you don't want to listen to the end, then you can tune out. But yeah,
basically, forget about the next 20 minutes. If you want just the answer's no.
We're fucked.
Should we leave it there?
We're done. It's game over. But yeah, interesting book, man. It's got a lot of
This is probably going to be the one we've worked the hardest on in terms of the content. There's a lot of. I actually studied economics at university, and it didn't help with this book, the economic. But yeah, so there's a lot of economic theories and stuff in here that we had to work our way through. But hopefully we've got a bit of a grasp. And it's something different, I think.
It's something different and very, very important. But yeah, it's not your mainstream kind of viewpoint on how the economy works. And as we'll get right into it soon, but it's all about looking at new factors that the mainstream economists don't look at, and it's all about private debt levels, and all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, correct. And so it starts out chapter 1 from Triumph to Crisis in Economics. And Steve Keen loves this guy called Hyman Minsky. And basically, Minsky has a quote here. He says that essentially in any pure free market capitalism society, that crises are inevitable because thanks to the financial system, capitalism is inherently flawed, being prone to booms, crises, and depressions.
Yeah. So he breaks, or the mainstream kind of way is breaking it up into microeconomics and macroeconomics. Yeah. And I'm going to throw you under the bus here, man, and handball them both to you for the definitions.
So essentially, microeconomics is say an individual market for an individual good or service, and that what you get taught in school economics and university economics, which I don't think Steve Keen quite agrees with, is basically that say you've got a market and you've got a supply curve, a demand curve, and you've got price and quantity. So you've got quantity left to right and you've got price up and down. Fuck, it might be the other way around. I don't even remember. No, but essentially...
sounds impressive.
Essentially, might be the other way. Essentially, that they're saying that with supply, theoretically, that if the price goes up, then supply will go up because the suppliers want to sell more when it is high price, and demand goes the other way. In that when it gets more expensive, quantity goes down.
Yep.
So I think Steve says that's extremely, extremely basic. And the idea is that the price goes up and down until eventually somewhere in the middle it meets where supply and demand meet at the equilibrium, the price and the quantity where both demanders and suppliers are happy. And so then what a lot of mainstream economists do is say, okay, well, we've got the demand and supply for this market. We can use that to then go to the macroeconomics. If we add up all of these individual markets in microeconomics, put them all together, you get macroeconomics, which is the whole economy. And that's where you get your aggregate demand and aggregate supply.
Yeah. So it's, I guess, the whole mainstream view of looking at it, it's like a steady state kind of system where they don't factor in booms and bust cycles at all. It's just all...
they're pretty much, they're just like we're always going to be in equilibrium.
So mainstream economists in the past, they've never really factored in these boom and bust cycles. So in 2003, Nobel Prize winner Robert Lucas said the role of the mainstream economists and those in the Fed, its central problem of depression prevention has been solved for all practical purposes and is in fact solved for many decades. So this is one of the most respected economists in the world. Won a Nobel Prize, just saying depressions are over and everything's going to be good forever.
4 years later,
everything happened. So even in 2008, at the start of the year before the crisis, unemployment was like 4.5%. Inflation was right on the money with a 2% Fed target.
Yeah,
man, this is all sounding pretty familiar, isn't it? This is what we're going through right now.
Yeah, exactly.
All this mainstream optimism, I guess. But yeah, in stark contrast to Fed models, so they have all these beautiful models about how everything's going to happen. unemployment rose rapidly and inflation spiked to 5%, then went to negative 2%, and capitalism almost collapsed.
Oh,
wow. So, mate, the mainstream models are not always that accurate, basically. That's the moral of that story.
And they also, in sort of these boom periods, that this Hyman Minsky character said that we resort to herd behaviour in investment, in that when everything's going up, then everybody thinks that everybody else in the world knows better, so they'll just copy what everyone else in the world is doing. And so rather than using our own individual judgment, which we then think our individual judgment's worthless, we fall back on the judgment of the rest of the world and just copy what everyone else is doing, which just means keeps building that bubble, blowing it up, and then we all get hurt.
So, mate, should we go into how the actual economy works, say from Steve Keen's, big bird's eye view kind of thing?
We'll go, the boom and the bust cycle you meant?
Yeah.
And this took us a little bit of time to try and dissect, but we got there, I think.
We think we did. I think we just dissected the information that we kind of like to suit our...
If anyone's reading this book at home, page 18, 19, 20 is the gold of where this is coming from.
Yeah, 100%. So, let's go.
So essentially, people are pretty happy with what's happening. If a boom's happening, then everybody's got high expectations. He calls them euphoric expectations. They're expecting, the boom's coming, we're going to make a lot of money, we're going to make a hell of a lot of profit. So in order to maximise on that, they take out debt, and banks give people money for these investments because they think it's going to be awesome. But essentially these projects aren't going to work out in the end, but they don't know at the time.
Yep. So at the start, you got what he calls the capitalists. They're all, with these euphoric expectations, they're really optimistic about the projects they take on. So they take on these debt, and the banks are optimistic also, so they get debt. Maybe they probably shouldn't. So, shall I continue, mate? So as the economy starts to boom, thanks to these higher investments, also employment rises. And then there's also a greater demand for raw materials.
Yep.
That drives up wages and then the prices of commodity inputs, he says.
Yeah. So you've got the employment rising, you've got the price of the inputs rising. He's also saying that when people are getting more debt, that the interest rates are also rising. So basically these, the people the capitalists who are running this thinking we're going to make a lot of money, yes, revenue might be going up, but because the cost of wages are going up, cost of raw inputs is going up, cost of interest rates is going up, they're not actually making that much profit that they expected to make.
Yep, that's right. So when they're not making so much profits, because as you said, the cost of money is higher and the money is being diverted not to them, to all these other things, then
the employers and the banks are getting the money.
They're no longer euphoric. So right now, at the start they were euphoric and optimistic.
Yeah.
Now he calls them depressed expectations, not euphoric expectations. So
they're realising the profits they were expecting aren't going to eventuate, and that's when they get sad.
Yeah. So they're sad, they're upset, they're crying, and then this reverses the interest rates because they are not so optimistic. The demand for money decreases, and then the interest rates also go back down. So money becomes cheaper again because less people want it.
Yeah. And at the same time, employment will go down because they realise they're not going to make the profits, so they'll start firing people. So employment goes down, so there's a lot of unemployment. But also with this, if the projects aren't working out, the cash flow goes down, so they can't repay the debt that they just took on. So they've got this residue of debt sitting there that they can't service.
Yep. But at the same time, then the debt's still there, but then now the money's low again.
Yeah.
It's slowly...
And because employment went down, wages are falling.
So then the capitalists who are euphoric, depressed, they're now euphoric. So then the boom and bust cycle...
They realise, wages are cheap, interest rates are cheap, cost of inputs is cheap, so let's fucking invest in some projects.
But the key thing, and this is whole Steve Keen's all his work is basically on this big mama. It's so when this boom and bust cycle keeps going, they leave a residue of debt every time. So this private debt is just builds and builds with each cycle. And then with every new boom and bust cycle, there's actually more money that's diverted to servicing the debt. So it gets harder and harder. Yeah. And so forth.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, good. I guess if I'll try and bring it down to an individual level maybe to be more relatable. Say you, I don't know, you buy a car and you take out a $10,000 loan, and as that $10,000 loan, you got to pay $500 per month to pay it off. And then you take out a personal loan for $20,000 and you got to pay $1,000 per month to pay it off. Then maybe you rack up some credit card debt, and so you take up $5,000 of credit card debt. You got to pay $500 a month. So basically, the more debt you're getting, every time that debt service cost is going up because you got to pay that debt. The more debt you have, obviously, the more you have to pay off each month. And essentially, if you get to the point where that debt servicing cost, those monthly repayments, are more than your monthly income, that's when you're absolutely cooked.
Yeah.
And so he's saying that every time the boom and bust goes up, the debt goes up, debt goes up, debt goes up. And once the debt servicing costs, those regular repayments, outstrip the profits,
and it's
cooked.
so this
That's
is
the end.
so this is what's happening, and this is compounding this debt. So there's less money being siphoned off to the entrepreneurs and the capitalists, trying to innovate and make more money, but it's not there.
Yeah,
It's just paying off debt.
So they sort of think, when it goes down, they're able to pay off their debt because the interest rates go down, wages go down, so they can pay it off, and then when the boom comes, they get more debt, and it just keeps building until they're cooked. So I think that's the bulk of the main arguments of the boom and the bust cycle, and why we're heading towards a crisis, and that every time we've had that boom, we've got more and more debt. And we haven't had that big crash yet. Yeah.
So chapter 2, man.
Mate, chapter 2 only had one thing. Basically, he was saying that there's all these economic models, all these economic theories, and saying that, yes, there's some fundamental truths that, like, some, relationships between things that, if the debt to GDP ratio rises, if debt rises faster than GDP, that just makes sense mathematically and fundamentally. And he's saying that, like, employment rate will rise if the population growth keeps going up. And so just things like that, he's saying, makes a lot of sense. Yep. But economists try to tie them all together and it doesn't quite work. He's saying, like, contrast it to a model of the weather, which you can model, but he's saying in economics, you can't just link all these things together because basically humans are unpredictable and there's too much stuff that you can't link it all together, basically. So that's what I have for chapter 2.
Yeah, so they're shit. The models are shit.
The models are shit.
The mainstream economists are idiots.
Yeah, correct.
Steve Keen's a fucking man.
That's it.
He is. Chapter 3, the lull and the storm. So yeah, the man, Steve Keen. So he made warnings in December 2005 about the upcoming collapse. Yeah. So there's no doubt about that, and that goes against the face of the mainstream economists. And he's up there, right up against them.
Yeah.
So they all think guys like him are idiots, don't they?
Correct. Yeah. As you said, in 2003, that dude said there's never going to be a depression again, not for the next 3 decades at least. Yeah. We fixed it.
And these are Nobel Prize winners. They're the academia. They've got PhDs and all these theories, but they just can't model basic shit, basically.
So then 2 years after that, Keen said he was testifying in court, so he wanted to check it. He said that debt is rising exponentially. And he's like, oh, hang on, if I'm going to say this in court, I better research and make sure it is. And he checked it, and he says, yes, it's rising exponentially, definitely. Yeah. So he's just saying that...
I'm dropping my laptop.
But yeah, so he's saying that debt, that's why he thought, something bad's coming, and that's 2-3 years later, GFC hit. Yep,
you're right. So yeah, he threw it as a runaway line. So the private debt to GDP is exponentially saying, and then he plotted it, and it was a 0.98 correlation coefficient.
Yeah.
So he's like, fuck, there's this crisis coming, and he sees it clearly. But the mainstream economists, they do not model private debt in their models at all. They don't even look at the debt, and it's one of the, he says the economy is GDP plus credit, and they don't even model the debt part, do they?
Yeah, exactly. And he's saying once that credit dries up, then you get everything slows down pretty much.
Yeah. So, expenditure are saying it's GDP plus credit. So this generates the incomes plus capital gains.
Yep.
And the capital gains are from assets, which is property and shares.
Yep.
And all that. So credit is huge in the economy, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah, nice. Now what he goes into now is saying, yes, there was this big crash in 2008, but This book was written in end of 2016, published early 2017, and he's saying that the next crash is coming, and he's specifically targeting China, South Korea, Australia, and Canada. We don't want to obviously focus too much on just Australia in this podcast, but he's saying the crash is coming in Australia. And the main reason is he says that Australia did not avoid the crisis because we got off pretty safe in 2008. We had 1 quarter of negative growth, but we didn't even have a recession, and it was fine, pretty much. But he says Australia did not avoid the crisis; it merely postponed it by restarting its housing bubble.
Yeah. So that's the only way you can avoid the crash is by postponing it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's big on, I guess, the housing bubble in Australia at the moment. It's everyone loves property and thinks it's the end of all problems, really. But
I guess basically a bubble is essentially just it's going up because it's going up. Like there's no reason that it should be going up, but because it's going up, everyone buys, and because everyone buys, it goes up.
Yeah.
Even though,
So then it goes up.
And then as soon as they realise, hang on, why did it go up so much? That's where you get the
See you later. So just on housing, and this is another one of the big things that Steve King says be differently to everyone else. But so the physical supply of housing is the turnover of existing houses plus new houses. Correct? Yep. Simple. The money in property is the flow of new mortgages, and the flow of money for new mortgages is the change in level of debt.
Yep.
So as the debt goes up or down, there's more money in the housing market. So the booms and the busts is directly correlated to debt. Yep. So you divide this by the current price level, and you have the amount of houses you can buy at this price. So what the big thing takeaway in this little section is there is a relationship between the acceleration of mortgage debt and change in house prices. So the change in debt is directly correlated in a big way to the house prices.
I'm with you.
So, yeah, you with me, mate?
I'm with you. So is he saying that? So which comes first, the change in the prices, or the debt should come first, and the debt should change the house prices? Yeah.
Yeah. So as soon as debt starts decreasing a little bit, and people are less willing to take on debt, then it's due to the acceleration, not the actual change. It's due to the acceleration. So it's like a double exponential drop. So it's going to drop hardcore.
Okay, so even if debt is still going up, but at a lesser rate.
Yes,
that's bad.
Correct. So it's all about the acceleration.
Yep, nice. I'm with you. I definitely missed that one, but I'm with you.
And so what happened in Australia, mate?
Yeah, so basically in Australia, the crash was coming overseas, and so the Aussies were like, we need to somehow pump Australia up.
So we're back in the reset. We're talking about 2008 right now.
And so the Australian government acted immediately, and the government pumped a lot of money in. And how they did that was they targeted a thing called the First Homeowners Grant, where if it's the first time you're buying a house, you get $7,000 from the government to put towards your house. But so they doubled that or tripled that in some cases. So you can get up to $21,000 for a first home buyer if you're buying a new house.
Yep.
And so that's why all the young people who hadn't bought a house before thought, I'm going to get this extra free $20,000 from the government. So they went out and bought houses, and that's obviously that demand for new people coming into the property market helped fuel the bubble.
Yep. So and homeowners were able to pay with only 5% down, and then on top of that, we had China coming in a big way.
So China sort of is growing massively, 7-8% every year. So they wanted all of Australia's coal and iron ore. Basically, from the First Homeowners Grant and China, that Australian housing fell a little bit in 2008, but by 2010 it was back above the pre-crisis levels. So
during that whole period, and Australia's property has gone up even more now, it's because, again, the private debt's been accelerating. And so as of March 2016, Australia's private debt is 22% higher than it was at the time of the GFC.
Oh, wow.
And it comes back to our first, I guess, few points we were making, that these levels of debt, it's unsustainable. You can't just keep going more and more debt.
Yeah, exactly.
And because a lot of the money, the energy or the money gets siphoned off into servicing the debts, and then there's less money for the... So it can't go on ad infinitum, and and as Steve kind of points out, it's crazy not to have debt as one of the biggest parts of economic models.
So basically, they're saying that GDP is growing, but for it to keep growing, we have to keep going into more debt. But that's obviously not sustainable. There has to be a point where it crashes, get rid of a lot of the debt, and start again. Is that sort of right?
That's right. And I guess with every boom bust cycle, he's saying there's going to be a fucking big mother one coming.
Yeah,
big. Gets rid of all the issues from the other boom bust cycles and leaving more debt. So, debt's fucked.
Yeah, nice.
Next bit.
Yeah. Mate, so chapter 4 is called The Smoking Gun of Credit. That sounds ominous.
Yeah. So how does credit work a bit, mate?
Well, I think so. He's saying the banks are definitely play a big role in that, and he's saying that the idea is that if the bank's giving out debt, it's because all the people who invest their money, like in a deposit account, everyone who deposits their money in the bank takes those deposits and lends it to someone else. So the idea is that they're just matching up creditors and debtors, and taking the people who deposit, giving their money to people who want to invest. And that's the theory, but it's not really true because banks only have to hold, I don't know what the percentage is exactly, 10% or something. So they can essentially just make up all the rest of the money and giving out as debt, creating this new money out of thin air.
Yeah, so that's what they call fractional reserve lending, right? So banks can pretty much, if you want to borrow money, they just pretty much type a few numbers in out of thin air. It's absolutely out of thin air. Money just pops up and then a deposit goes into your account. Exactly. So I think that the intuitive common sense idea of money is not really how it works. It's just it's a whole figment of just on the computer, just a few numbers typed in by someone at the bank.
It is. It's bizarre.
So that's how. Yeah, I guess that's how credit comes in. And then, so I guess you briefly mentioned earlier about the having too much private debt to GDP, having this ratio which Steve Keen looks at, it's been too high. You're cooked.
Yep.
You're game over. But there's a good graph he's got in page 88, right, with the danger zone.
Yeah, and so he says the danger zone is essentially if your private debt exceeds 150% of GDP, then you're in trouble, and if your the amount of credit is 10% or more of GDP, you're in trouble. So it's saying that if the total private debt is 150% of GDP, so that means obviously that would be like saying if your personal debt was 150% of your income for the year, then you're in trouble. And he says that if your credit, so if 10% of the GDP growth was fueled by new credit, you're in trouble as well. And so the ones who are in trouble before the GDP, we can see clearly Spain, Ireland, Denmark, Portugal, the US, the UK. So these are all, and New Zealand, these are all the countries that crashed in the GDP. Australia's in there, but he's saying that, as we mentioned, that Australia had put off. And so Australia is still in there now. So that was the pre-GFC one. And so they're the zombie. He calls them zombies, the walking dead of credit.
And then I guess now we got, then after that, China went through this huge infrastructure boom and borrowed all this money and all that. And then now they're fucking done, aren't they, mate?
Mate, China's in the danger zone.
Right now, China's
way up there. Hong Kong's way up there. Australia, as we said, is still in the danger zone because they delayed it. Canada, Korea, Belgium, Norway, they're in the danger zone as well.
So there's only two ways out of the danger zone, and that is to, I guess, move further into the danger zone or you collapse out.
More credit, yeah. That's
or you just get out of there.
Once you're in there, you either just keep riding the wave and keep blowing out that bubble, or pop.
He calls it the junkie's dilemma. So he uses the analogy of, say, a dude shooting up heroin. You know, he's got the choice of going cold turkey, or he can continue to shoot up on credit. So it's like a drug, having this credit. You can't do it. It's not healthy to just keep relying on this credit or this increase in debt. You got to someday go cold turkey and collapse the fuck out.
And that's what he says. It has to burst at some point. And so I guess the biggest concern is China. He says that China alone accounts for 16% of global GDP. So 1/6 of the world's GDP, the whole world, is China.
And Australia relies on China.
And Australia.
So we're pretty cooked.
The rest of the world doesn't care if Australia pops.
Yeah.
But we care if China pops, and the whole world is cooked if China pops.
Mate, it's time to start blaming people, I reckon. So we'll go to the blaming. So who's to blame for all this shit? Basically,
economists.
The mainstream economists. So they're the real culprits in the crisis and its aftermath, Keeney says. So,
I think it's because the government are the ones that are calling the shots, but the economists tell the government what to do, yeah?
And they're not learning.
Because they're geniuses. They know what happens, what works.
They're PhDs, they've got these huge formulas and all these maths degrees and all that. But so they're advising governments that credit is benign and rising debt is no cause for harm. They just common sense just suggests it's unsustainable. Debt cannot go exponentially forever, and if it does, there's going to cost more money to service it. It's like
exactly.
Anyway, so mate, I guess we're gonna interview him, so we'll go into his solutions, but we'll just give him, I guess, a brief mention now, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we got the Keane, Big Steve Keane, on an interview coming up, so he'll be able to give us some more.
Yeah. He's a smart dude, man. We'll try and catch up with him.
Basically, he says, I think he gives two options. Yeah, one he calls the helicopter money, or something jubilee.
The modern day debt jubilee or something. So it's like at the moment, what the governments did during the crisis was quantitative easing. I guess where they bailed out the banks and then they just printed all this money for the banks to pay off their debt. But he's saying it's kind of like quantitative easing for the people, where you just print all this money and just chuck it into people's bank accounts. So the people can pay off, who are in debt can pay off their debt, but then the people who aren't in debt get all this fucking free money. Yeah, mate. What I don't understand there is why wouldn't inflation just go through the roof then and see you later, like Germany did, didn't they?
I don't know.
I don't know, mate.
We'll ask the Keane. But basically he says, if you've got... And the way he does it, because obviously companies have got a lot of debt as well. And so he's saying it's two-pronged, that if an individual is in debt, it reduces their personal debt. If you're not in debt and you get that money, then you have to use that money to buy company shares. And the companies have to use the money from those shares that they bought to pay off the company's debt as well. Yeah. Man, it sounds good in theory. It would be pretty hard to execute. Yeah. And the other one is the entrepreneurial equity loans. Basically, he says that at the moment, entrepreneurs can't get funding from the bank because the bank knows 9 out of 10 businesses are going to fail in the first year. So if they loan to 10 people, 9 of them are going to fail, and they're only going to get their interest repayments from the one. So they're losing 90% of the money. But he's saying that if they were able to somehow get some kind of equity in the business, that one that does work, if that grows 10x... that makes up for the other 9 losers. Yeah. So right now, I guess there's more incentive for banks to lend out money to like speculative housing bubbles and stuff, as opposed to entrepreneurs. But the whole economy as a whole, and everyone will benefit more if more money went to the entrepreneurs. Yeah. So, dude, I guess we both agree for the book that there's a lot to learn from it. Yeah. And we both learned a lot from the book. Yes. I think it's great, and you think it's average. I think the book is not good, not well executed. There's some solid lessons in there, but not well executed. But what do you reckon, mate? Surely it doesn't matter if you learn something and you get the message. That's all that matters. I think if you think that you're worrying about execution, you should go and read a fucking non-fiction Harry Potter stuff and enjoy your 3 hours reading. So I think if you learn a message, man, that's all. It's most of what it comes down to. Yeah, mate. My argument for the execution, that the book needs to be good and approachable. If this is written just for economists and just for Steve to say, "Can we avoid another crash?" and sell speeches to companies, and he'll come and talk about it, that's fine, because people aren't going to read it. Only economists are going to read it. If this is meant to be for the everyday person reading the book and realising they need to get out of debt and realising the world's in trouble, so they need to try and protect themselves, then this is a fucking shit book. But I think it's good lessons, but it's too deep. There's too much dense economic theory and jargon in here that the everyday person, it's not approachable. So I reckon if I didn't have to read this because I knew we were doing the potty, I would have probably read 10 pages and put it down. So I reckon that's just my issue, is that if he wants everybody to read it, it needs to be more approachable. We can't agree all the time. Sorry, it's great. Learn a lot. Let's hope Steve Keane doesn't listen to this before we interview him. Fuck. Steve, we love you. I'm going to sing a song for you, mate. Let's bring back Steve. Bring Steve. I love you, Steve. I love it. Let's bring Stevie back. Can we avoid another financial crisis? No! No! Steve! You're so smart! Steve, you're so smart. You know everything about economics. You're really, really good. You know everything. Save us, Steve. Save us.
In 2005, Steve was there, and all the other mainstream economists, they thought we were good. But Steve, he already knew. Steve is an intuition. He knows everything. He's like a sidekick motherfucking legend, isn't he? Steve!
I'm sorry, Steve, I don't like your book, but you're really, really smart. You know everything about economics.
Steve! Steve! Tell me more, Steve. Tell me more of those big, big words that I don't understand in your book.
Blow up the debt. Blow up the bubble. Just get more debt. 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 Debt.
Get that debt and inject the debt. Inject the debt into your anus, Steve. Into my anus.
Debt goes up. Money goes up. Employment goes up. Wages go up. Raw materials go up. Cost goes up. Interest rates go up. Everything goes up.
Then pop goes a bit. Pop. Ah, my house! Oh, fuck! There goes my fucking house. Oh, fuck! There's all my fucking money in stocks. They're all fucked. You should have listened to Steve, not that fucking Nobel Prize cunt.
Mate, fuck the mainstream economists.
That fucking Nobel Prize cunt. Should have listened to fucking Save me, Steve.